Let me tell you about the absolute disaster that is my life. My wife cheated on me with a Hollywood director, kept a massive secret from me for 7 years about our daughter, and then somehow had the nerve to make it all my fault. But to really understand how things got this messed up, I need to take you back to where it all began. I'm 32 now, and she's 30. We've actually known each other for ages. We went to the same school back in the day. There was always this unspoken thing between us, like a mutual crush that never quite turned into anything real. We'd steal glances, exchange a few words on our birthdays, maybe share a smile here and there, but that was it. Nothing ever came of it. Then, a few years ago, everything shifted. I left a comment on one of her pictures online, and that one tiny interaction opened the floodgates. Right away, I could tell she was interested, and I wasn't about to let the chance slip by this time. I got her number fast, and that very night, we ended up talking on the phone for 4 straight hours. We just couldn't seem to run out of things to say. Not long after, I asked her out. Our first date was at this little cafe. She showed up looking nervous, cheeks a little flushed, with this adorable awkwardness about her. At one point I reached over, took her hands in mine, and started massaging them lightly. She didn't pull away. If anything, she seemed to enjoy it. The second date was even better. We walked around town, and she started opening up. She mentioned she hadn't been feeling great lately, bad headaches, some health struggles. She also shared that she'd been seeing a therapist for the past year, trying to get her life in order. Then, she told me this bizarre story about a friend of hers who had been on medication prescribed by a psychologist, and suddenly realized she was married. By the third date, I thought I had a pretty good grasp of who she was. But just as the night was wrapping up, she dropped a bomb on me. "Remember that friend I told you about? The one who got married while on medication?" she asked. "Yeah, of course," I said. "Well, that friend was me." I just froze. My brain short-circuited for a second, trying to process what she just said. But then I shrugged it off. I figured whatever, no need to overthink it. So I didn't press for details. She explained that she'd been married for 2 years, still lived with her husband, but their relationship was falling apart. According to her, he had checked out emotionally, distant, uninterested, just going through the motions. No kids, no real connection left. Before long, things between us escalated. She started spending nights at my place, and it became a regular thing. I even drove her back to the house she still shared with her husband after one of those nights. It was surreal, to say the least. By our 4th date, things had gone even further. We had a couple of drinks, and I took her to a small apartment I'd rented just for us. She looked anxious, and I watched her call her husband, telling him she was staying at a friend's place. That was the night we slept together for the first time. The next morning, she headed to work looking a little disheveled but still effortlessly stunning. Since I lived about 60 miles away from her, I started renting places whenever we met. It became our routine. 2 or 3 times a week, we'd go out for dinner, talk about anything and everything, and then end up back at the apartment. Every time, the night ended the same way. But it wasn't just about the physical connection. There was something about her that completely captivated me. She was sharp, well-spoken, and incredibly cultured. She had this deep love for classic literature, could talk endlessly about films that actually made you think, and had a passion for jazz that made her eyes light up. She could discuss famous directors and musicians in a way that made you want to listen. There was this elegance about her, this refined, sophisticated energy, that I found completely intoxicating. Still, something about the whole situation gnawed at me. No matter how much she claimed to despise her husband, she still went home every night, and slept in the same bed as him. She swore he annoyed her, that everything he did made her skin crawl, and that the only reason she stayed was to keep up appearances. She didn't want to deal with people asking questions. Then, one day, she casually mentioned that she had even changed her last name to his. That caught me off guard. "If you got married while you were out of it on meds, how did you go through all the paperwork to change your name? That's not something you just do by accident," I said. She hesitated, scrambling for an explanation, but nothing she said really added up. That was the first time a real seed of doubt took root in my mind. Was she actually telling me the truth? Then came the bombshell. She told me she was pregnant. My brain just short-circuited for a second. I had no idea how to react. A weird mix of emotions hit me all at once. There was this strange, almost instinctive sense of pride. Was there a chance the baby was mine? But as quickly as that thought came, reality shoved its way in. The timeline wasn't adding up. I started doing some mental math, going over our meetings from the past few months, trying to piece together when it could have happened. The truth was, it was possible. We had spent so many nights together, and our connection had been intense. But I also couldn't ignore the other possibility. She was still living with her husband, and while she swore their intimacy was practically non-existent, I had no way of knowing for sure. How rare was rare? I didn't want to ask outright, not yet at least. Instead, I tried to play it cool, hoping she'd drop some kind of hint. "Do you know how far along you are?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She hesitated for just a second before answering. "Not exactly," she said. "The doctor thinks about 6 or 7 weeks. 6 or 7 weeks. That didn't help much. It still left too many gaps, too much uncertainty. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into thick fog. I wanted this baby to be mine. I needed it to be mine, but that nagging doubt wouldn't go away. The weird thing was, she didn't seem worried at all. If she had any concerns about the baby's paternity, she didn't show it. She never brought it up, never hinted at any anxiety. She just carried on like everything between us was completely normal. But then, there was this one moment that stuck with me, one tiny slip that sent a chill down my spine. We were sitting together, talking about the pregnancy, when she muttered, almost to herself, "I just hope he doesn't suspect anything." I froze. "Who?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as possible. She blinked like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "No one," she said quickly, brushing it off. "It's nothing." It wasn't nothing. That one sentence twisted in my gut like a knife. Who was she talking about? Her husband? Me? Both of us? The doubt started to gnaw at me, creeping into every conversation, every interaction. I found myself scrutinizing her words, reading into her expressions, searching for any hint that she was keeping something from me. Did she already know the truth about the baby's father? Was she just choosing not to tell me? Then came the moment that shattered whatever was left of my denial. She called me one evening, her voice unsteady. "I need you to drive me to the clinic," she said. "They want to run some additional tests." "Of course," I said, not thinking twice. When I picked her up, she was clutching a piece of paper, a lab form. She tried to slip it into her bag quickly, but I caught a glimpse of the name printed at the top, her husband's. The second she saw the look on my face, she rushed to explain. "Oh, it's just the insurance paperwork," she said. "They always put the policyholder's name on everything." It sounded logical enough, but something about the way she said it felt off. Too smooth. Too prepared. My gut told me she wasn't telling me the whole story. That night, lying in bed, my mind wouldn't let it go. The pieces started clicking into place. If she was going through all these appointments under her husband's name, and if she hadn't told him yet, maybe she didn't need to. Because maybe, deep down, she was convinced the baby was his. And just like that, the doubt I had been trying so hard to suppress came crashing down on me. After the pregnancy news, things started shifting. She became more distant, pulling back in ways that were hard to ignore. Then, one night out of nowhere, she hit me with something I wasn't prepared for. "I'm not sure I want to keep doing this," she said. It was like a punch to the gut. I tried to reason with her, to get her to talk to me, but she wouldn't budge. "I just need time to think," she said, her voice steady but distant. And just like that, I felt her slipping away. I couldn't just let things end like that. One evening, without warning, I showed up at her place, determined to talk things through. But when I got there, She was drinking wine with a friend, laughing like nothing had happened. It was as if all the tension from before had been wiped away, except for the invisible wall still standing between us. All night she kept shutting me down with the same dismissive phrase. "I don't need this right now." She said it over and over, like a line she'd rehearsed. I sat there, biting my tongue, trying to keep my emotions in check, but inside, I was unraveling. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I sent her a long, raw text, pouring out my frustration, my confusion, everything I had been holding back. Her response caught me off guard. She apologized, saying she had felt overwhelmed and hadn't known how to deal with it all. For a little while, it felt like things were back on track. She finally moved out of her husband's house and into her own place. At first, I was relieved. It felt like a step in the right direction. But then, I found out something that nearly broke me. Her husband had helped her move. I only learned about it by accident. One day, I was at her new apartment, and I noticed a bookshelf in the corner, perfectly put together. Casually, I asked if she had assembled it herself. She hesitated, just for a second too long. "Oh, my ex helped with that," she said, trying to sound casual. "Your ex?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Well, technically my husband. I mean, my former husband," she corrected herself. The way she said it sent a chill through me. She had moved into her own place, but they were still connected, more than I wanted to admit. As time passed, I noticed something else that didn't sit right. It wasn't just her ex-husband she kept in touch with. She seemed to have a habit of staying close with all her exes. One day, the curiosity got the better of me, and I finally asked, "Why do you keep in touch with these guys?" She shrugged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "That's just who I am," she said. "I don't believe in cutting people off. They've all been a part of my journey, and each of them shaped me in some way. But there was one ex in particular who really got under my skin. He wasn't just some old boyfriend, he was her former philosophy professor. She had lived with him for years before she got married, and from the way she spoke about him, it was clear he still held a special place in her life. She even called him the most influential person she had ever known, someone she felt deeply indebted to. And here's the thing, she still saw him. Like clockwork, once a month, they'd meet up. She swore it was nothing, just two old friends catching up. "He's practically family," she'd say, like that was supposed to make it all make sense. But every single time, it ended the same way. He'd say something that tore her down, left her in pieces. She'd come home looking wrecked, only to turn around and do it all over again the next month. One night, after watching her drag herself through the door looking like she'd been through hell, I hit my limit. I couldn't take it anymore. When his name lit up her phone later that evening, I didn't hold back. "If he calls again, I'm texting him myself," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I expected her to get defensive, maybe tell me to stay out of it, but she didn't. She just sat there, completely still, like she was waiting to see if I'd actually do it. And somehow, that silence? It was worse than any argument we could have had. After what felt like forever, she finally spoke. "He doesn't mean anything to me anymore," she said, her voice low. "There's no romance, no feelings, nothing like that. He's just part of my past." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But no matter how many times I tried to shake it off, the doubt kept creeping back in, like an itch I couldn't scratch. Then, in the dead of night, around 3 a.m., I heard a knock. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness, it might as well have been a gunshot. My heart slammed against my ribs as I stumbled out of bed and opened the door, still half asleep. And there she was. She looked broken. Her coat was thrown on in a rush, and she clutched a small bag like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her eyes shimmered, full of unshed tears, making her look both fragile and determined at the same time. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I didn't say a word. Just stepped aside, letting her in. She moved like someone carrying too much weight, sinking onto the couch with her hands clenched in her lap. I stood there for a second, unsure of what to do, before finally sitting across from her. For a long time, she said nothing. The silence was thick, pressing in on both of us. Then, finally, she lifted her gaze to mine. Her voice trembled. I didn't know where else to go, she admitted. I love you. Only you. I swear I haven't been with him, or anyone else, for so long. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But in the back of my mind, that same voice was there, whispering, reminding me of all the times things hadn't quite added up. Of all the inconsistencies. The half-truths. The moments that made me question everything. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. I was trying to protect myself, trying to put some kind of barrier between us. Maybe you should just go back to your husband. She went completely still, like she couldn't quite process what I just said. Then, after a long pause, she slowly got to her feet. There was no anger in her expression, just this deep, crushing sadness that made my chest tighten. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut straight through me. Fine, she said softly. I'll go back. But answer me this, what kind of man walks away from his own child? Her words hit like a sledgehammer, knocking the air right out of my lungs. My child. Could that even be possible? For months, doubt had gnawed at me, questions I was too afraid to ask circling in my mind. But now, the truth, the weight of it, was staring me in the face. I opened my mouth, desperate to say something, but nothing came out. I just sat there, frozen, as she turned toward the door. And in that moment, watching her leave, I knew I couldn't let her go. Not like this. The first few months after our daughter, Lily, was born were a blur. I threw myself into fatherhood with everything I had, determined to be the kind of dad who was always there, who could give her the love and stability I'd never had growing up. The sleepless nights, the chaos of balancing work and diapers, it didn't matter. I was all in. But no matter how much I focused on Lily, one thing became painfully clear: my wife hadn't changed. Every Friday night, without fail, she'd head out with her friends. At first, I brushed it off. She was a new mom, maybe this was just how she coped. But then Fridays turned into Saturdays. She started coming home at sunrise more often than not. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was just overthinking things. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. One night, after I finally asked where she went during those long hours, she laughed and admitted she didn't even know half the people she was partying with. And that was the moment it really hit me. What kind of mother leaves her newborn at home to spend nights with complete strangers? At first, I tried to talk some sense into her. One morning, as she stumbled through the door reeking of alcohol and stale cigarettes, I finally said, "You can't keep doing this. Lily needs you. I need you." She barely reacted, just waved me off like I was being dramatic. "You're overreacting," she muttered, too exhausted, or too uninterested, to argue. "I just need a little time for myself." But as the months stretched into years, things didn't get better. They got worse. The intimacy between us faded, slowly at first, then all at once. When it did happen, it felt forced, like an obligation, not a connection. And her words cut deeper than her absence ever could. "You're just dull," she slurred one night, swirling the last sip of wine in her glass. "We don't even like the same things. You don't care about poetry, theater, film. You're just you." I tried to push back, tried to defend myself. "Just because I don't spend my nights reading Rilke or watching indie flicks doesn't mean I'm not worth talking to." She nodded like she understood, like maybe she even agreed. But the very next day, she treated me the same way all over again. And while Emily drifted further away, my bond with Lily only grew stronger. She became my whole world. I'd wake up early to pack her lunch, struggle through braiding her hair before school, something I'd never even attempted before her. I memorized the names of all her stuffed animals and read her favorite bedtime stories on repeat until she fell asleep, her tiny hand wrapped around mine. On weekends I took her to the park, teaching her how to pump her legs to swing higher. "Higher, Daddy! Higher!" she'd squeal, her laughter cutting through everything else, the loneliness, the frustration, the cold distance from my wife. At school events, I was always there, camera in hand, cheering louder than anyone. And then one day, she drew a picture of our family. There were only 2 people in it. Her and me. No sign of her mother. It crushed me. But I didn't say a word. The cracks in my marriage kept widening as Emily's recklessness spiraled. Her nights out weren't rare anymore, they were routine. I'd come home after a brutal 20-mile commute, exhausted, only to find her gone yet again, leaving Lily with a babysitter. And when I confronted her? She always had an excuse. A reason that never quite added up. "Who are these people you're always hanging out with?" I demanded one night, my voice rising with frustration. "Do you even know them?" Emily just shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "They're just people. I don't owe you an explanation." Her indifference made my blood boil, but I knew that yelling wouldn't get me anywhere. So instead, I focused all my energy on being there for Lily, doing my best to shield her from the growing distance between us. But Emily's contempt for me only deepened. One evening, after I'd spent hours helping Lily with a school project, she shot me a look filled with disdain. "You're so predictable," she scoffed. "Like an old piece of furniture, useful, but lifeless." I forced a chuckle, trying to brush it off, but her words burrowed deep, leaving a sting I couldn't shake. Then, one afternoon, something set off alarm bells the moment I walked through the door. Emily asked me, on video, no less, to show her exactly how I logged out of her Instagram account. The way she asked, all jittery and tense, made my stomach twist. Why was she so worried? What did she think I'd seen? That uneasy feeling wouldn't let go of me. So later, when she wasn't around, I opened Instagram's browser version and checked her messages. That's when I saw a name that stopped me cold, a filmmaker. My curiosity turned to dread as I clicked on his profile and read their conversations. The way she wove lie after lie with such ease, like deception was second nature to her, made my skin crawl. My stomach churned. What kind of man wouldn't feel like a complete fool after finding out his wife was secretly texting other men? And it didn't end there. I checked her SMS messages. Yes, actual SMS in 2024, if you can believe that, and found even more conversations with her so-called friends. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Our relationship had been crumbling for a while, but this was like tossing gasoline onto an already raging fire. Things between us had turned frigid, ice cold. Intimacy became rare, and when it did happen, it felt mechanical, like we were just checking a box. Then, out of nowhere, she started casually mentioning that filmmaker, dropping little hints about how he was her type. Hearing that felt like a slap to the face. How could she say something like that to me? It only made my suspicions burn hotter. Her phone had become yet another battlefield. She was always texting someone, but no matter where we were, she kept the screen tilted away from me, like she was guarding state secrets. Then came the moment I snapped. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd had enough of feeling like a fool. Without telling her, I decided to show up at her place unannounced. But when I got there, she was nowhere to be found. Calls went straight to voicemail, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at me, telling me something was seriously off. Desperate for answers, I started looking for her laptop, thinking maybe I could finally get some clarity. But it was gone, she'd taken it with her. And that alone sent my doubts into overdrive. Who takes their laptop with them for a casual day out? Nobody does that unless they've got something to hide. She finally called me back later that evening, just before 7 p.m. Her voice was shaky, unsure. She told me she'd been at a friend's place the night before, drinking wine by the river. No details, no reassurance, just that vague, hollow excuse. But the part that cut the deepest? She didn't even ask about Lily. Not a single word about her own daughter. That was it. I lost it. Every ounce of frustration and anger I'd been holding in came boiling to the surface. I demanded answers: where she'd been, what the hell was going on. But her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't get defensive. She didn't fight back. Instead, she just seemed guilty. Then came the apologies. Over and over, she kept saying I was overreacting, that we didn't need to fight. "I'll make it up to you," she whispered, her voice soft, too soft. Like she knew exactly what to say to smooth things over. And somehow I let her. I let my guard down. That night, we ended up tangled in what felt like make-up loving, but when it was over, a bitter taste lingered. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, one thought refused to leave me: I'd just been played. After that, we took a trip to the mountains, and honestly, it was a great vacation. For a brief moment, things felt normal again. But then something strange happened. I noticed a white discharge on my genitals. Panic shot through me. I was freaked out. After that, we didn't sleep together again. She brushed it off, saying it was because of some female issue. Once we got back from the trip, that uneasy feeling gnawed at me again. So, I went through her messages. And that's when I found it, a screenshot from the filmmaker. "If only you knew the kind of happiness you brought me in bed. A little disappointed I only got you to the peak of pleasure 3 times in one go. I'm sure your husband does it way more than that." Just to be clear, by this point, we hadn't been intimate in over 2 months. I was stunned. My mind went blank for a second, my heart hammering in my chest. But somehow, I forced myself to act normal, like I hadn't just read the most humiliating thing imaginable. While she was in the bathroom, I grabbed my phone and took screenshots of those messages. I needed proof. My mind raced with ways to turn this around, to make it look like I stumbled upon them by accident. But then, on impulse, I decided to check her Telegram. And that's when I found the hidden conversation. She had been messaging one of her friends, and they were laughing, actually laughing, about how they had completely messed with my head. But that wasn't even the worst part. My daughter Lily, my precious little girl, wasn't mine. And the father? Guess again. Not me. The real father was her old boyfriend, the philosopher. And he had known all along. She had even forwarded a message from him to her friend saying, "It's so interesting that Lily is my daughter. This will be a fun little experiment, haha." I couldn't breathe. It felt like a bomb had gone off in my chest. This wasn't just some random betrayal, it was something calculated. Planned? And the worst part? It wasn't just a stranger who did this to me. It was someone close to me. I stumbled outside, trying to clear my head, but the more I pieced things together, the clearer it all became. She wasn't just a liar, she was a master manipulator. And then something hit me like a freight train. Back at the hospital, I had seen her husband's name on a piece of paper. I remembered it clearly. That's when it all fell into place. She had tried to trick him first. She had tried to pass Lily off as his daughter, but unlike me, he must have figured it out. He must have seen right through her lies and kicked her out. And that's when she came to me, spinning her web of deceit all over again. I lit another cigarette, pacing back and forth, trying to calm the storm inside me. By the time I got home, the house was silent. Everyone was asleep. I walked into Lily's room, standing there in the doorway, staring at her. But something had changed. It was like I couldn't see her as my daughter anymore. The more I looked, the more her features seemed unfamiliar. The resemblance I had once convinced myself was there, wasn't. I couldn't look anymore. I didn't want to. The next morning, I didn't waste any time. I told her straight up about the discharge I'd noticed. I made it crystal clear that I hadn't been with anyone else, so there was only one possible explanation. The moment I said it, her expression shifted. Panic flashed across her face before she quickly tried to cover it up. Then she hit me with something unexpected. She claimed I wasn't the only one. I didn't let it slide. "All right then," I said. "Let me see your messages with the filmmaker. If there's nothing there, I'll feel better." Without hesitation, she handed over her Facebook conversation. But I wasn't stupid. I already knew there wouldn't be anything there. The real proof was in her text messages. So I pushed further. Now I'm going to check if he called you. That's when things took a turn. I opened her text messages, but before I could even get a good look, she snatched my phone right out of my hands. You can't look at that, she blurted out. Then, just as quickly, she put the phone down and slid it back to me. But I caught something. Before she grabbed it, there were 3 messages in the thread. Now there were only 2. I stared at her, feeling my blood start to boil. Who do you think you're fooling? There was a message in there that proved you were cheating. She didn't say a word. She just looked down, silent. I didn't press her any further. I got up and walked away. And as much as I wanted to confront her about Lily, I couldn't bring myself to do it. That little girl was innocent. None of this was her fault. And that's when everything really started. For the first 3 days, I completely ignored her. I let her calls go unanswered, and by the time I finally checked my phone, I had over 200 missed calls. The first day alone, she was calling every 20 minutes. Then, when she realized I wasn't picking up, she started sending me videos on Telegram, crying, pleading, begging me to answer. At first, I actually thought she was genuinely upset. So, after 3 days, I finally gave in and picked up the phone. Big mistake. The second she heard my voice, her whole demeanor changed. It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, she was calm, composed, totally fine. That's when it hit me. Those tears? Just another manipulation tactic. Guys, don't fall for it. Then came her confession. She admitted she had cheated, but of course, it wasn't her fault. She claimed she was just riding in a cab one night, happened to pass through his neighborhood, and by some cosmic coincidence, he invited her to hang out. One thing led to another. He bought her wine, they went for a walk, and then, surprise, he just so happened to have a house nearby. According to her, she, accidentally, ended up inside. What an unfortunate series of events, right? The ultimate victim of bad luck. Then she had the nerve to tell me that the sex only lasted 10 minutes, and was the most awkward experience of her life. Really? That's your defense? Funny thing is, she got home at 1 in the afternoon. 10 minutes, huh? As time went on, the details of her story kept shifting. Suddenly, the sex had only lasted 5 minutes, and was even worse than she originally claimed. I mean, 5 minutes? How was I even supposed to be mad at that? Then came the excuses. Apparently it was all my fault. Why? Because I never stopped her from drinking with random people on Fridays. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're not 12. I shot back. You don't need me to tell you what to do. And then came the final act. She flipped the script entirely. Suddenly, after everything, she had realized what she truly wanted. Now, she understood that she loved me. What a joke. When I asked her where her so-called love was while she was sleeping with the filmmaker, she had nothing to say. No excuses, no justifications, just silence. But then, like clockwork, she started scrambling for a way to spin it. She claimed that for months, she just couldn't figure out if we were truly in a serious relationship. Seriously? We were married. And now, conveniently after the affair, she suddenly realized that what we had was real? That now she was sure we were serious? I couldn't let that slide. How do you justify that? I demanded. Did being married mean nothing to you? That's when she hit me with something unbelievable. A real man should be able to forgive, she said. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Fine, I told her. I'll forgive you, but only if you're honest with me. So I asked her a simple question. Do you want to have a child with me? She hesitated. Then, finally, she said, yes. But not now. First, I need to get Lily settled and figure out my financial situation. That answer didn't sit right with me. So I asked again, looking her dead in the eye. Do you want my baby? Instead of answering, she deflected. What about Lily? That was it. That was the moment I broke. I felt the tears welling up, but I didn't care anymore. I reached for her hand, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Emily, I hate you. Go to hell." For the first time, she looked shocked. But the moment passed quickly, and her expression hardened into something smug, judgmental. Then she smirked. Smirked. "I always knew you were weaker than I thought," she sneered. "You're not going to do anything anyway. You're not going to find anyone. So bear with me, Pookie." Her voice dripped with condescension. And then she twisted the knife. "Everything you read? It's all true. I never loved you. I just used you." I walked away before I did something I'd regret. Lily had heard everything. When I stepped into her room, she was already in tears. I knelt down next to her, my heart breaking, and asked, "Lily, do you want me to be your father?" Without hesitation, she wrapped her little arms around me. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered. I hugged her back, holding on tight. "You won't be alone," I promised. "Not anymore." That was the last straw. I filed for divorce immediately. If I remember right, Emily's stuck in some nasty drama with the filmmaker now. Karma has a funny way of working things out. As for Lily, she's with me. We packed up and moved to another state, leaving all that toxicity behind. Life is so much better now. I'm even thinking about getting full custody because, to be honest, I don't trust that monster to stay gone forever. Lily still misses her mom sometimes, I can tell. But Emily? She hasn't even tried to reach out. The last time we spoke, I told her I was filing for custody, and she made it all about money. That alone tells me I have a good shot at winning. And now, here I am, watching your videos. I wish I had found them before all of this happened, but at least they're helping me now. I'm sharing my story because I hope it helps someone else, someone who might be going through what I did. And if you do decide to share this, I just want to say one thing to everyone out there: take care of your loved ones. Don't take time for granted. That's exactly what I'm doing with my beautiful Lily. Life after the divorce felt like a long overdue breath of fresh air, yet at the same time, an overwhelming sense of responsibility weighed down on me in ways I had never experienced before. Lily and I moved to a new state, far away from the wreckage of the past. The transition wasn't easy. She struggled with the changes: new home, new school, new people. At night, I could hear her shifting in bed, unable to sleep. I tried to make things easier for her, doing everything I could to keep her mind off what we'd left behind. We explored the parks in our neighborhood, tried out different ice cream shops, and I made sure to be there for her whenever she needed me, whether it was helping with schoolwork or just listening when she wanted to talk. Despite my efforts, I could see the sadness in her eyes. She missed her mother, no matter how much Emily had wronged us both. I never spoke badly about her, but Lily wasn't a little kid anymore. She understood more than I gave her credit for. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "Dad, do you think Mom ever really loved me?" The question hit me hard. I put my arm around her and sighed. "Of course she did, sweetheart," I said, choosing my words carefully. She doesn't always know how to show it the right way." Lily didn't say anything for a while, just curled up against me. I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. Meanwhile, I was preparing for the custody battle. I knew Emily would show up sooner or later, and I wanted to be ready. She hadn't contacted Lily since we left, but I wasn't naive enough to believe she was gone for good. When we did speak, her words were always about money. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't fighting for Lily, she was fighting for control. One day, I received an email from Emily. It was short and to the point. "We need to talk. Call me." I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. A part of me wanted to ignore her, but I knew that wouldn't make her disappear. So I picked up the phone and dialed. When she answered, her voice was calm, too calm. "So, I heard you're trying to take my daughter away from me." "She's not just your daughter," I corrected her. "And where have you been?" "She hasn't heard from you in months." There was a pause. Then she let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, don't act like you're some saint. You think you can erase me and play the perfect dad? Newsflash, you're not perfect either. I don't have to be perfect. I shot back. I just have to be better than you. And let's be real, Emily, that's not a high bar. She scoffed. You don't get it, do you? You think you've won? You think you can just take her and walk away? Her voice dropped to a colder tone. We'll see about that. The call ended abruptly, leaving me gripping the phone with white knuckles. I wasn't afraid of her empty threats. What scared me was the fact that she was the type of person who would do anything to get what she wanted. And I had just declared war. After that call, I knew I had to move fast. I contacted my lawyer and gathered every piece of evidence I had: Emily's abandonment of Lily, her infidelity, her manipulative games. I wasn't just going to fight for custody, I was going to win. For months, Emily tried to intimidate me, sending messages filled with threats and guilt trips. But I didn't waver. Lily deserved stability, love, and a parent who actually put her first. Emily, on the other hand, was too wrapped up in her own selfish world to provide any of that. When the custody hearing finally came, she showed up looking polished, wearing a fake smile, pretending to be the perfect mother. But the judge saw through her act. My lawyer presented everything: her complete lack of involvement in Lily's life, her disinterest until money was on the line, and even her past lies. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Full custody was mine. Emily barely put up a fight after that. She stormed out of the courtroom without a word, and just like that, she was out of our lives for good. For the first time in years, I felt free. Lily and I settled into our new life, and over time, she began to heal. The sadness in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by the light of a happy, carefree childhood. She made new friends, got into painting, and started talking about what she wanted to be when she grew up. As for me, I finally let go of the past. I started focusing on my own happiness, too. I reconnected with old friends, got back into the hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage, and eventually, I met someone kind, genuine, and nothing like Emily. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced, and for the first time in a long time, I felt what real love was supposed to be. Years passed, and Emily never came back. She disappeared into whatever mess she had created for herself. And honestly, I didn't care. Lily grew up knowing she was loved. She didn't need a mother who only saw her as a bargaining chip. She had me. And in the end, that was enough.